Hey guys, today's episode with Coach Paul Mills from Oral Roberts University is presented by Compassion International, the most trusted child development ministry in the world. 70,000 kids left in desperate need of help because of the pandemic. Compassion is doing something about it, standing in the gap, and you and I can partner with Compassion right now to release these children and their family from poverty. Check out fillthestadium.com to learn more and to help release these families from devastating circumstances and poverty. Check out fillthestadium.com.
Welcome to Sports Spectrum, where we bring Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, former ESPN producer, Jason Romano.
And welcome everyone to the show. I am Jason. This is the Sports Spectrum podcast. We're so glad you're tuning into our show today. Make sure you go to check out our website, sportspectrum.com, to see all the articles, stories, devotionals, podcasts at Sports Spectrum. All the content that we're sharing is right there. It's all for free, and it's at the website, sportspectrum.com. Look at Sports Spectrum as a resource. That's what we want you guys to think about when you're consuming our content, when you're reading our stories on the website, when you're listening to our podcast like this one. Look at it as a resource that you can not only be encouraged in your own journey, maybe a little bit entertained, but then sharing it with someone else. A great way to share the gospel, to tell someone about Jesus, which is what we're all commanded to do as followers of Christ. Maybe you're looking for something that kind of opens up the conversation or the opportunity. And this is what we look at as Sports Spectrum, is a way to do that, as a resource for you to share your faith. So look at Sports Spectrum as that. Make sure you check out the website, sportspectrum.com. Check out all the articles. And when you're there, make sure you sign up for our weekly newsletter. That's an email that comes to your inbox once a week and allows you to be updated on all the content that you may have missed here at Sports Spectrum. You just go to sportspectrum.com, click the newsletter icon, put your email in, and you're good to go. And it's all for free at sportspectrum.com. And I'm glad that we have a conversation today with a coach named Paul Mills, who is leading Oral Roberts men's basketball program, because this conversation went in a lot of different directions, but glorified God, I think, in its entirety. And I loved talking to Coach Mills. This is a guy who was an assistant coach for 14 years at Baylor University before getting his opportunity in 2017 to be a head coach at the Division I level with Oral Roberts. And if you know anything about Oral Roberts, you know that Jesus is in that conversation with them as well, just like we have Jesus in our conversations. And Paul Mills had this opportunity in 2020 and 2021 to lead his team to a Summit League championship, finishing a season that went and saw them go 18-11, 10-5 in conference play, a 15 seed in the 2021 NCAA men's tournament in March Madness, and then 2 wins in the big dance. As a 15 seed, they upset number 2 Ohio State in overtime, and then they beat Florida 81-78, and then go to the Sweet 16, and they almost win that game. They take on Arkansas and lose by 2. Our conversation with Coach Paul Mills starts with appreciating the run that they had last year, but also understanding that as a coach, you want to get that last W when you lose by 1 possession. But man, Oral Roberts had such a great run in the tournament, and it was so wonderful to watch them glorify God through it all. But also, this conversation takes a turn into Coach Paul Mills' journey, going from Baylor for 14 years to Oral Roberts, as I mentioned, and all that kind of took place and how God worked it all in his journey. And then we talk about the movie Hoosiers, which Coach Paul Mills has a bit of an obsession about, but in a good way. And it's one of my favorite movies as well. So take a listen to Paul Mills, Hoosiers enthusiast, Oral Roberts men's basketball coach, follower of Christ. Lots of good stuff here from Coach Paul Mills. It's happening right now on Sports Spectrum. Let's take a listen. Coach Mills, welcome to Sports Spectrum. How are you?
I'm great, Jason. It's an honor to be here. I've heard a number of your interviews and often get inspired by listening to some of your guests, specifically athletes. And I know you interview as well, a number of coaches. So it's an honor to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here. You were on my radar the second March Madness ended, and I thought, man, Coach Paul Mills, I want to have this guy on because not only are you glorifying God at Oral Roberts, and that's what Oral Roberts is about, but you get to be on the biggest stage in college basketball for a couple of weeks there in March Madness and all the way to the Sweet 16. I mean, what a run. And I think that's a really good place to start when you think back now, because we're in the early fall here of 2021. So it's been a few months and you're already probably turning the page to get ready for a new season. But have you been able to kind of process and really dissect and look back and appreciate all that you guys were able to accomplish earlier this year and even last season?
Yeah, appreciate is a tough word. I mean, as we know, we should be thankful, but I would encourage any of you, if you ever coach a Sweet 16 game, do not lose by one possession. That stuff will keep you up for months as you just think through, man, what if we would have done this differently or that differently? And you try to find ways not to beat yourself up over the issue, but there is the competitiveness that comes out in you over the course of these past 2-3 months. Being removed from that is like, man, how could we have catapulted to an additional round? And so I think about that a lot. It doesn't do well for my sleep, but from an appreciation standpoint, almost think that from a coach's perspective, you're almost like a parent. You want your kids to go through certain experiences, good and bad, that allow them to be molded. And so for me, it was so enjoyable that your players had the opportunity to experience the exhilaration of March Madness and what winning looks like and how you have to kind of prevent distractions in order to maintain a focus that's required in order to win. And so there were a number of things that occurred that I'm so thankful that our players were able to experience, that I know that will help them further down the road as they pursue various opportunities.
It's the hardest thing as a coach, isn't it, to turn the page and kind of live in that what if scenario when you know that you were that close. It probably would have been a lot easier if you got blown out by 30 in the Sweet 16 to just appreciate it more. But when you know that you were, like you said, one possession away from, I guess, facing your former team, right? You would have been facing Baylor in the next round, who ended up winning the whole thing. That's got to be one of the hardest things as a coach, to be able to look at and say, man, I appreciate where we got to, but one possession, right? That's got to be so hard.
No doubt. Coach Majerus, the great coach at the University of Utah, was a friend, and I would actually spend several of my summers in Salt Lake City with him. But I can remember when they played Kentucky in the national championship and they ended up losing. Yeah. And he said, I almost think it's better to not get to the national championship game rather than get there and to lose, knowing that you may never have that opportunity again. And he never had that opportunity again at any teams that he coached. And so I would just hear him kind of talk about that in the late 90s and early 2000s about opportunities that he had. And so I think we'll have other opportunities for me. Believe that, and fortunate to have really good players that present those kind of things. But I would like to run 2021 NCAA tournament back, but I'm sure a lot of teams would.
Oh, and especially being a 15 seed too, though, that's a seed that a lot of people don't even make it past the first round, right? And you guys not only won a first round game, you won a second round game, and you beat some powerhouses in Ohio State and Florida to get to the Sweet 16. Tell me about those wins and just what you saw, because those were close games. I mean, all three of your games were 3 points or less. The Ohio State win was an overtime game. Going through that experience of adversity, being able to win a couple of those games and going through that experience from being a 15 seed.
Yeah, I don't ever, when I talked to the guys as we were kind of going through it, they had never experienced the NCAA tournament. Our staff had 81 games in the NCAA tournament. And so we were just very conscientious about trying to educate these guys on what it would look like. The reality is Selection Sunday. There's kind of to some degree, a protocol. You kind of sit together as a team and watch it. They didn't even know that we did that. They were all scattered across the restaurant. And it's like, hey, guys, let's come together and kind of enjoy this together. And so there was just all this education that was involved for young men who've never experienced it before. But the reality was, as I shared with them, we're going to play a good basketball team. So whoever it is they announce, guess what, guys? They're going to be good. So for us, it didn't really matter the name. It didn't really matter the seeding. You were trying to avoid. I didn't want to play the 16 matchup, I think, which was on like Tuesday or Thursday in a couple of days. And so I didn't want to play that one. But after that, it didn't really matter to me, And so we knew that whenever they announced this, I probably wasn't going to sleep. I'm kind of a film connoisseur, and I just jump into this thing. And so for me, I was excited to jump into the film. And then our players, I think, were just excited to play. And we were able to, I think we played on a Friday, and we were able to get pretty dialed in. By Tuesday, I mean, the game plan, the scouting report, everything was done. And the presentation was done. And this was, I'm sure by the time Thursday came around, our guys were like, would you shut up? Could we start playing? We are sick of hearing about how good Ohio State is. And so from that context, you knew you were playing a good team. I knew our guys would be amped to play. And we were obviously fortunate that it worked out for us.
Was it nice to watch Baylor win it all, in the sense of a mentor and a friend and a former boss of yours and Scott Drew, and having been at Baylor for 14 years, I think I read? That's a long time. It must've been pretty neat to watch your old team go all the way and have them see them have that opportunity to finally win it all.
Yeah, incredible. Was able to be there at the national championship game. Scott called and said, do you want to come up to the Final Four? And it's like, you're going to have to win that one, bro, in order for me to come up on Monday. And so watching Saturday night, to watch them beat Houston, and then to play Monday night, was excited to watch those guys. Obviously, when you're around somebody every day for 14 years, that's a third of my life. At that particular time. I mean, outside of my parents and my wife, Scott Drew, and then the associate head coach, Jerome Tang, who I've known for 25 years. Those two guys, to have that experience, and some of those players you had recruited, some of them you had coached. So you were very familiar, just only being 4 years removed from that situation. And to sit with some of us, Matt Driscoll, who's the head coach at North Florida.
Sure.
He was with us on staff. Grant McCaslin, who's the head coach at North Texas. And so to sit with those guys and trainers who had moved on, and to just experience that, man, that time that you spent there with those guys, you were just so happy for them. And it was such an experience, not only for that coaching staff, but for the Baylor community. And Scott does it the right way, pours into those kids. I'm sure you've heard the acronym that he stole from Dabo, of joy.
Yes.
And so to know that you have a coach who doesn't want to do anything that diminishes his testimony, and to have it done on a stage like the NCAA tournament to win a national championship, super excited for him.
What was that like for you with that success and being able to tell people about Jesus through your success, to be quite frank about it, because that's what it's about, right? And Oral Roberts, to go to a Sweet 16, you're being interviewed by CBS and ESPN, all of these places on the highest stages, the biggest stages in sports or even in media. And you get to kind of, like you say, not diminish your testimony and share about Christ. Was that something that was on your mind, that you recognized, wait a minute here, okay, God's brought us to the Sweet 16. This is a big platform. Let's not waste this and make sure that we're not just talking about basketball. Did you recognize that?
100%.
Yeah,
You're very conscientious of it. One, you need to be authentic about who you are, and so you don't need to be phony. And so sometimes people, you can, having done this now for 25 years, you can kind of see people who don't even listen to the question and they have an agenda. And it was like, if ever the opportunity presents itself. And for me, I can kind of rattle on about scripture and Bible and theology
sure.
and go down that road quite a bit. And so I didn't want it to be force fed to whoever it was talking to and be almost pretentious, because sometimes I think it does more damage sometimes to the gospel. But if the opportunity was presented and you didn't have to give me much of one, I was
Yeah.
going to kind of run with it. And so from that context, was raised in a Christian home where we never thought anything about taking credit for ourselves. We always knew that there was a sovereign God who presented opportunities, and it was our job. Let your Matthew tells us, let your light shine before men, so that they may praise your Father who is in heaven.
Mm.
And we just wanted to be liked. And if ever we were given the opportunity, we wanted to make sure that glory was given to the right, in the right way, and to the right person. And so, from that context, March Madness obviously presents some opportunities there.
Let's take a quick break from our conversation here on Sports Spectrum to tell you a little bit more about our friends at Compassion International, releasing children from poverty in Jesus' name. They are the most trusted child development ministry in the world, and it's a company and an organization and a partner of Sports Spectrum that we value so much. And the work that they do, when I tell you how important it is, I'm not sugarcoating it here. It's incredibly important work, releasing kids from poverty, but doing it in Jesus' name, teaching these kids who are stuck in really dire situations about how they can accept Christ and have a relationship with Jesus. That's the most important thing, but they do it with compassion and through Compassion's programs. Now, due to COVID-19, 70,000 kids last year and their families in Compassion programs were stuck potentially without a sponsorship and are in need of your urgent support. Now, 70,000 is the capacity of the average pro football stadium. And since we've launched Fill the Stadium and their Compassion program a year and a half ago, we've seen almost 58,000 seats filled with Compassion's program. You guys have come through. I'm telling you, every seat representing a child in need, and we're close to 60,000 seats. So our goal is very much in reach of helping 70,000 kids and their families. But we're not there yet. So we need your help. It's almost to the end, but we have to keep pushing here to help these kids. There's still 10,000 children out there who need your help. Your help providing essential food and medical care and support for a child and their family during this ongoing pandemic. Help restore what COVID-19 destroyed by going to fillthestadium.com and donating today. Any amount helps. Fillthestadium.com. This is a stadium that cannot remain empty. Fillthestadium.com. We're so glad to have Paul Mills here on Sports Spectrum, Oral Roberts men's basketball coach. You alluded to growing up in a Christian home. I did read you're a son of a preacher, right? And was it Aldine, Texas? Is that where you grew up?
Aldine.
Aldine. Okay. Tell me
Yeah.
about that and life growing up, the son of a preacher man, as they say.
Yeah, my dad took the vow of poverty at a very early age. I know that, sometimes people, especially in the North, think that pastors are these high on the hog preachers at these Baptist, they usually think of Baptist churches. The
Yeah.
reality in the South is there's probably as many churches as there are gas stations. There's one on every corner. I believe the vast majority of churches have under 100 members. And so we were one of those churches, and my dad felt called to be in the ministry. And what I realized was ministry wasn't something that he just did on Sunday. Ministry was what he did every day. I didn't like it. Not only did I not like the poverty aspect, I didn't like the responsibility requirement aspect.
Sure.
I always thought that being at church that much is going to take away from my basketball game. And so it was great, but I do think that eventually you have to get to a point to where you own your own faith, and you have to decide if faith is important to you. But I was very fortunate to grow up in a home where it was important, but not only was it important, it was lived out. And so to have your dad as a hero, to have your mom as a hero, this wasn't something that was just talked about. This was something that was carried out. And so to see that displayed obviously gives me a wonderful framework on how this works in people's daily lives.
You said basketball was a big part of your life, obviously, as a kid too, and your game being affected by trying to, to do this church thing and this Christian thing getting in the way. But really something pretty significant happened to you. I read about in college, right? Is this where it was, or in high school, where you had a significant basketball injury that forced you out of playing? Can you kind of take us to that moment and what transpired?
Yeah, I was at Southern Nazarene University in Bethany, Oklahoma, and one day at practice, was there for my freshman year. It was a good basketball league. In fact, Oral Roberts University was in our basketball league, and the conference actually produced first round draft choices. And so I knew I was in a really good basketball place. For us normal sized guys to play Division II, in hindsight, it's really an honor.
Yeah.
And I was kind of your little guy that you were not going to be tougher than me. I went into the game thinking I will be the toughest player on this court. I will have more intensity than anybody else. But one day at practice, was diving for a loose ball and hit a stair, one of those concrete stairs that are out, and cracked the bottom vertebrae on my spine. I can remember being taken to the doctor, and he said, you in all likelihood, you'll never play basketball again. And so for me, I can remember the tears just flowing down my face, because for a young man, like, that's your identity. That's what you're known at, is what you were known at in the city of Houston. It's what you're known at in high school.
Yeah.
I mean, I had windmills on the back of my, jersey, on the back of my jacket, varsity jacket, because there was Air Jordan. And I figured if he was Air, I was Wind. And
windmills, that's good.
Yeah. And so from that context, it was just who you were. And so it's a pretty devastating experience, but I did know that I wanted to stay involved. And as I've shared with people, my gift wasn't playing as much as I wish that it was. My gift was helping. And an experience like that, as traumatic as it is for an 18-year-old kid, kind of allows me to better understand that the reality was I would have probably done it until my body couldn't do it anymore. But fortunately, at an early age, I realized that my gift was helping. It wasn't playing.
But still, there has to be a push-pull in this faith journey, right? Where there's a crossroads where you have to accept that you can't play basketball anymore. When you pour everything you can into a sport that you love so much, and you're 18 years old, and suddenly you're told you can't do this anymore, I'm sorry. It sounds great now, right? We can look back and God brought you through it, and now you're coaching. But man, I have to imagine going through that was not easy.
No, not at all. And I don't know that as an 18-year-old, I really had the framework to really understand things. And even if you did, I don't know that would have made that transition any easier. It isn't as if faith eliminates you from any types of obstacles, right? In fact, Scripture tells us, it says, "Many are the afflictions of the righteous." And so this tug about, I think what it is probably more than anything is trying to identify your purpose. I can remember as an eighth grader, my history teacher telling me that, you'll probably never play professional basketball. And I remember resolving, like, I will never talk to you again the rest of my life. But what you believed was your purpose at that time kind of changes. And so the passion doesn't change. It was just your purpose for the sport kind of changed. And so for me, navigating that world is difficult. It's obviously you're able to look back on it, as you are with a lot of experiences that you go through that are difficult in your life, and say, man, there is a bigger vision here. I've heard Dr. Chuck Swindoll, who's a pastor in Dallas, and
Sure.
he said, when you see God's hand on your life, you could probably not recognize it in the moment, but if you'll look back 5 years and see the journey you've taken, you can begin to see God's hand. And I thought that was wonderful perspective. I think it's sometimes difficult while you're going through it. But as you look back on it, you see the steps, and you remain faithful to what you believe you're supposed to do and what your purpose is. I think it helps mitigate some of the confusion that's going through your life at that particular time.
Coach Mills, you mentioned that your purpose was to help others, right? Not to play basketball, but to help others or be a helper. There's a lot of that in coaching. I don't think a lot of people in coaching, maybe from the outside, look at coaches as helpers. But, and I talked about this in one of my books I wrote about, being a leader means you're serving others. I mean, that's the example that Jesus gave to us, and that is being a helper. When did you realize that helping gift was going to be coaching? Was that pretty quick after you came to the realization that you weren't going to play anymore?
Yeah, I grew up in a socioeconomic situation where it was tough. And so as I would go through the neighborhood and watch kids play basketball, I just wanted to help them. One, because I saw what basketball could do for me. It allowed me to get an education. It took me places that I would never be able to afford or go otherwise. And so I just wanted them, especially players who had the talent, to understand that, man, this basketball can do a lot of things for you if you'll approach this the right way. And so for me, I just wanted to help kids get the most out of the opportunity. So I just started investing in kids because I wanted to see it happen. And I can remember one of the very first players that I was ever around was a young man named David Boston. Ended up playing professional football.
Yeah.
Went on to Ohio State as a tight end, and he was a really good basketball player. But I began to see how sports could open up doors. I mean, you were aware, but I never had a direct connection with a young man who went on to do other things. Well, again, I know zero about football, but I wanted to begin to help others through this basketball route. And because I saw what it would do for them, I saw what it would do for their families. And then I also saw what would happen if you did not approach this right. This could end up turning out really bad if you didn't approach it right. And so I just wanted to make sure that these guys approached this right. They had a foundation. And, as we often say around here, I wanted you to use your God-given abilities for God-given reasons.
I love that. God-given abilities for God-given reasons. The reasons for you take you through high school coaching and then to Baylor. And we talked about, Baylor's success in the last few years and certainly winning it all this past season. But you were there in some early years too with Coach Drew and those times where it wasn't easy and it wasn't, I would guess, a lot of fun when you're not winning right away. But you help them kind of build that culture up and build that team up for 14 years. When you think about Coach Drew, what's the great lesson that he's taught you? I'm sure there's a million of them that has helped you in your coaching journey when you came to ORU.
Yeah, my second year at Baylor, we won one game the entire conference season.
Wow.
We were 1-16, lost in the conference tournament. So 16 league games, and then you lose one. My last year in 2017, we were number one in the country.
That's
so
right.
I watched the pendulum kind of swing from one conference win to number one in the country. And had wonderful experiences from NCAA tournaments, Elite Eight, Sweet 16s, and had opportunities to not only coach really good players, but to go against really good players. And what that works out strategically, at our conference at the time, we were having to, whether it was Bob Knight or Eddie Sutton or Bill Self, or there were just so many Hall of Fame coaches in the league. So it forced you to really be sharp. I would tell you the one thing that Coach Drew would often do is one, I can remember our second year. He mentioned a coach and just said, I do not think, guys, that I'm smarter than anybody else. And I need you to understand that I don't believe we can win because of me. And he
Hmm.
said, it's going to take all of us. That kind of humility really resonated. And that one, it is about the players. And so we need to make sure that we're here to serve the players. They need to know that. He would often say, I don't ever want you to think you're working for me. You're working with me. And so, he would tell us that, do your work unto the Lord. You don't do it for me. That's who we work for. We work with each other. And so from a humility standpoint, I thought he handled it really well. He had a wonderful mentor in his dad and Homer Drew, who's a Hall of Fame coach as well. And
Yeah.
then I would tell you the other thing is he would often say, many hands make light work. And it would be from the most minute thing of moving a table. He had called 10 people over there to move a table, and he would shout out this phrase, many hands make light work. But in regards to running a basketball program, that was the case. And so there was nobody who wasn't deemed significant and had a stake in this, whether you were a student coach and it was your first day on the job as a freshman, or whether you were an experienced graduate assistant. To anybody on staff, to our his assistant, Karen Craig. There were just so many people who we all knew that we were trying to row this boat in the same direction. And he made everybody feel valued. And so from that context, the humility context, and then showing value and honor to every single person, were two things that you just walk away from. And as you look at the psalm that says, those who without the Lord, you're laboring in vain. Every meeting, every practice was started in prayer, because we didn't just want to do work just to do work. And so we never wanted to labor in vain. Unless the Lord builds a house, we were being futile in our work, and we never wanted to do that. And so his submission to people, to Christ, and the humility at which he carried it out, what was a great way in which you see ministry done at the college basketball level.
Love that. In doing my research, Coach Mills, on you, I understand there's a courtesy car story during your time at Baylor that I'd love for you to share. I loved what I was reading about that, and it wasn't a ton, but I thought, man, that's a great story. And I know that you're humble and you want to be humble in the way that you answer it, but it's such a good story, I think, for our listeners to hear. Can you share that?
Yeah, when I was given a car as an assistant coach at Baylor, and you have an extra car that you don't need,
Right.
and so I mean, it wasn't as if this is a $100,000 vehicle. It's more like a $7,000 vehicle, and wanted to pass it along to somebody who could actually use it. I shouldn't say that I couldn't use the money. I don't want to come across that way, but I just thought there was a greater need somewhere else, and ended up passing this along to somebody who could get more out of it than I would.
So it's a car that the school gives you as being a coach, a courtesy car, and you were able to give that to someone else who needed it. I have to imagine that person that you gave it to was pretty thankful. Who was that person? Was it just a random person that you came across, or was it somebody close to the program? Do you know? Can you share who that was?
No, I hadn't been around, and so I didn't know him, and so it was a random person.
That's great. I love the story. It's a good little reminder, I think, for all of us who are, because we have so much, the abundance of things that we all have. We've been given so much, and just having the mindset to say, okay, do I want this? Do I need this? Is there somebody else? I mean, if we all had that mindset, I'm just thinking in life, but also inside the church, inside the body of Christ, it would look differently, I think, in the way that we value people, in a way that we value others differently than we just look at ourselves. Would you say that helped? Is that something that's always been there with you about looking abundance, right? Because I know we didn't even talk about this. You took pay cuts throughout your journey as a coach to pursue this passion. So I have, growing up the way you grew up, I have to imagine that's stuck with you.
Yeah, I heard Andy Stanley, the pastor out of Atlanta, one time say that rich is having more than you need,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and so don't ever say that sometimes you're not rich. It may be discrediting the blessings of God, and simply to acknowledge, whether you're rich in time, whether you're rich in energy, whether you're rich in a variety of ways. One of the ways in which I have more than I need, I didn't. I mean, I grew up in a very poor home. I never needed much. We
Yeah.
kind of learned how to survive and learned how to make it. And so I can assure you, I didn't need a third car with my wife and I. And so from that context, it was, listen, we have more than we need. Let's find a way in order to serve, in order to assist others, and so for me, it was just, man, let me acknowledge a blessing that is pretty cool. And then at the same time, if I get the opportunity, somewhere along the road to acknowledge that I have more than I need and to do this as a favor to somebody else who is not affiliated with our program. This isn't as a quid pro quo.
Yeah.
This is just, as we've often heard, a random act of kindness. The motive was pure, and I just wanted to assist. I would just tell you that I wouldn't shy away from your riches. I think it's almost looked upon as a bad term in today's society. There's people who demean folks who are rich. I would tell you that I think a number of us are rich. We have more than we need. And so because of that, I wanted to make sure that overflow of having more than I need. And I'm also trying to lower my needs. I'm also trying to be as low maintenance as possible.
Yeah.
That would allow me opportunities to assist and help others.
No, that's good. I also read that you love one of my favorite movies, Hoosiers, which I would hope you would if you're a
Phenomenal.
coach,
Yeah.
and you're a basketball loving person like I am and like you are. But I read that you have sort of a bit of an obsession over Hoosiers in the sense that you've watched it hundreds and hundreds of times and can quote that movie probably as good as scripture. And I'm not saying that to demean you, because I'm the same guy, right? There are movies that I know better than many books in the Bible. Do you remember the first time you saw that? Because we're about the same age. And I remember I was I think it would have been 86, right? So I would have been in 8th grade, I think, when I saw it in the theaters and just loved it. Do you remember the first time you saw it?
I actually don't. I
Really?
didn't see it in theaters.
Okay.
I may have seen one movie in my entire life up until
Really?
about age 22, and
Okay.
so I didn't see it in a movie theater, but I'd heard about it.
Mm-hmm.
I'd heard about a coach who had gone to Milan High School and helped a team and turned it around, and I was just so inspired by that story. So when I watched the movie, that was what I wanted to do. I was a high school coach for 6 years. But that movie, that's what I want to do. I want to inspire a community to have an opportunity to win a state championship, regardless of what anybody thinks the odds are. And just to invest in those 8 or 10 or 12 young men, like that was it. That was my calling. And so Hoosiers just kind of put in perspective, gave me a framework, gave me a drama in which this all plays out. And so what I began to do is every time I ever coached, I would have it on. If a game was at 7, somewhere around 1 or 2 o'clock, I'd put the movie on, and then there were days where I just watch it if I just wanted to be inspired. But for me, that was all I dreamt about. It was all I thought about. Was, man, what that creation there in that movie is what I want to create in a real-time environment.
And all you got to do is go to the moment where Jimmy Chitwood goes to the to the town and he says, coach stays, I'm playing, he goes, I go, and
Yeah.
start it right there.
Yeah.
And that to me is maybe the best hour in a sports movie that you could find. But there's deeper things involved in this movie. It's about coaching and accomplishing something and being the David to a Goliath. But I resonated with this movie because I grew up with a dad who was an alcoholic. And I actually wrote about this in my first book about the impact Hoosiers made on me because I saw the kid, I can't remember his name, I'm sure you do, whose dad was the Dennis Hopper character who
Yeah.
just could not get sober. And that was my story with my dad, and the forgiveness that needed to be involved in the relationship and the bitterness. You could sense that he had a lot of bitterness and embarrassment. I thought that there are these underlying messages and really relationship driven stories that are being told in a movie about basketball.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. As you're just watching the movie, you sense the embarrassment from very early.
Yes,
Remember Dennis was asking the principal for some money at the local diner,
that's right.
and the son had to come over and kind of tell him, give it back. And
Yeah.
so you sense it really early. And so this level of not only basketball bringing people together and helping others, but you hear a dad tell a son that says, I love you. And so what happens there is you realize the power of sports and the power of unity, that sports can sometimes bring people together and put you at this emotional level sometimes that allow you to be vulnerable.
Mm.
And it is what you see in the movie. And it's a great, because of basketball and because of the euphoria associated with it, you're able to address some issues, good and bad, that comes along with the ups and downs of sports.
So my last question on the movie, it's got to bring you great joy to show someone this movie the first time,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I've actually made my daughters are 16 and 14 now, but when they turned 8 years old, that was their 8-year-old birthday requirement. Is you have to sit with me and we have to watch this movie. Now at 8, that's probably a little too early.
Sure.
I should have probably moved it back to like 12 to where they weren't as. But I was always anxious, like, and both of them sat through. One of them sat through courteously. The other one enjoyed it, and I don't know that they've ever seen it again. But it was this wow. Look at how a whole city, a whole town gathers around a group of people. But there's this fundamental element to it that despite all that's going around you, there are certain things that don't change. A goal is 10 foot, a court is 94 foot. And if we get distracted by all of these other things and we're not paying attention to things that are already fundamental, we can kind of get lost in the chaos. And so from that perspective, I just love those scenes. It's something that I have to remind my children of, that despite the chaos that goes out in the world, you're going to come home to a place that hopefully is going to be the same every single day.
Yeah.
And it is inside this element where we have to make sure that there's unity, despite all the chaos that's going on out there. And so from that context, there's a lesson and bigger things that can be taught from it.
You had to have a Normandale moment for yourself, Paul, when you're walking in to play in the NCAA tournament as a
We
15
didn't,
seed.
because we didn't get to Hinkle. I mean, that
That's
was
true.
the
That's
one
true.
thing I was like, man, if we get to Hinkle, I may lose it.
But still being a 15 seed and pulling the upset and facing, the team that you're not, supposed to win against, big bad Ohio State and big bad Florida, it feels like you had kind of a Hoosiers moment, even though it wasn't in Hinkle, Hinkle Stadium.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't. Baylor actually played in Hinkle, and I saw the sun going through and I was
Yeah.
so jealous.
Yes.
But we had played at Purdue before when I was coaching at Baylor, and so was familiar with that. Being in
Okay.
Indiana, I mean, I've gone to the tiny Milan gym And I've visited down there. I've walked in the locker rooms and taken a
Yes.
million photos. I have shirts that my kids wear probably once a week that say "I'll make it."
Yeah.
The famous Jimmy Chitwood saying there in the movie. But I don't know that I ever really thought of it as a Hoosier experience as much as I thought of it is how do I do right by my players?
Mm.
How do I make sure I'm prepared? How do I make sure that I'm not thinking beyond anything other than whether it be that practice or that scouting report or this meeting or this possession? And so I don't know that I ever got there mentally. I get the parallels afterwards, but from the context, you're just so conscientious about, I want to do right by my guys. I want to do right by my guys and their families. That it's really, I don't deviate. I'm very much a focused person. And so I get locked in on whatever it is I'm supposed to be locked in on. But I do understand the parallels.
So my last question has to be looking ahead now, and expectations, because you make the Sweet 16 and you come one possession away from being an Elite Eight team. So now you're expected to do that every year, and you got to turn around and have a season now in 2021 going into 2022 where the expectations have to be a little higher, I would imagine, for you, Coach. And now you have to kind of balance that with getting a team ready for another season.
Yeah, I mean, one, let me give you a shout out because you recommended a TV series called The Chosen, which I think is fabulous.
I did. Yeah.
And somebody texted me after we had a player who left the NBA draft to return to school. He's the nation leading scorer in Max Asmus.
Yeah.
And somebody had texted me, well, wow, your expectations just went through the roof. And I text back, who would want low expectations?
That's
Like
right. Yeah.
who would want to say we don't expect to do something significant? I think about that when I watched that TV series. It was once Jesus began to do certain miracles, the expectations were really high, right?
Yeah. That's
And
good.
he obviously can deliver. I'm not making any promises here on our ability to deliver,
That's right.
but it was that if you'll do things a certain way, that these expectations will follow. For us, we may or may not have the ability to perform, but it is again, if my job is to remain faithful and honor my players by making sure that I bring the best of me every day. I've kind of used this phrase a lot. Metaphorically, my job is not to fill our players' cups as me and my coaching staff. Whether or not they receive anything we're saying, that's actually up to them. What is my job is to empty mine and to make sure that I'm invested and I'm poured into those guys and love those guys. And those guys have no doubt. Like, not only was he organized and passionate, but he loved us. Like, that dude emptied his cup. And so it's not my job to fill theirs. It's my job to empty mine. And I just want to make sure that I'm doing that. And you see that obviously in the TV series, The Chosen, is you have Jesus just emptying his cup every single day. And because of that, that not only is he our model that we want to mimic, but I don't mind the expectations. But at the end of the day, it's not my job we need to reach A or B or C because I'm trying not to look beyond that day.
Right.
It's my job to empty my cup. And I just want to show up every day, love my guys, invest in my guys, and empty my cup. And the reality is I don't always get it right. And I have to come back the next day and I have to apologize to them. And apologize to my wife, apologize to my children. But there are days where I don't get it right. I want you to know that I'll correct it, and I'll try to get it right the next day. But my job is to empty my cup and not fill theirs.
Emptying our cup. And it's funny too, you mentioned The Chosen. So if people are listening and they didn't see me post about it on Twitter or whatever, people need to go watch The Chosen. It is the best thing I've watched in 2021. It's 16 episodes, I think. If they're trying, it's done in a different way. So we'll give The Chosen a shout out here, Paul, and let people go watch that. It's
Terrific.
phenomenal.
Great recommendation. I always find myself, especially we have some downtime. Our players are gone for the next couple of weeks now that they've left, and it's a dead period for college basketball. And I'd always hear about TV shows that people binge on. And and I was like, man, I never really find anything that's attractive. One, I don't watch much TV or movies outside of Hoosiers. But The Chosen is tremendous, absolutely tremendous. So shout out to The Chosen, but shout out to you, Jason, for passing it along. I don't know that I would have stumbled on it otherwise.
I appreciate that, Coach. We'll be hopefully stumbling upon Oral Roberts having a really great 2021-2022 season as well. I can't believe college basketball is just around the corner. So it's a lot of fun to be thinking about what you guys can accomplish. I love that you have the high expectations, and why not? And let's see what the Lord will do. Coach Mills, thanks so much for being generous with all the time that you've given us. Your story is phenomenal. Going to be exciting to watch your team this year, and all the best to you going forward. Hopefully we'll get you back on.
Jason, pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And many thanks to Coach Paul Mills from Oral Roberts for joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. The ORU men's basketball season in 2021 kicks off in a couple weeks, and it'll be really awesome to welcome college basketball back to the sports landscape and be able to watch Oral Roberts make another go at an NCAA tournament berth. And who knows, maybe further than last year, which would require them to go to the Elite Eight. But they got their leading scorer back in Max Asmus, and Paul Mills is still there. And I know that their expectations, as he said on the back end of the interview, are high, as they should be. We should all have high expectations in all that we are going after for Christ. So just appreciate Coach Paul Mills, and hopefully we'll have him back here on the show sometime. All the best to him and Oral Roberts for a great season in 2021-2022. We also appreciate you as well for joining us. Thank you for tuning into our podcast today. As I mentioned at the top, I want you to look at Sports Spectrum as a resource. Look at us as a place where you can come to and listen to conversations, read about these stories on our website, order our magazine and get those stories in a magazine form. But then look at it as a resource that you can share with someone else, right? Look for it as a way to introduce people to the gospel through sports. Tell them about Paul Mills and say, hey, you need to hear this coach's journey that he's been on. And maybe it introduces someone to the power of the Holy Spirit, the power of the gospel, and the power of Jesus that can impact lives for so many for eternity. So look at us as a resource. Check out sportspectrum.com. All of our content is there, except for our magazine, which you can actually order right there on the website. Again, sportspectrum.com. And then tune in next time for a brand new episode here on the podcast. We love you guys. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Stay safe and join us next time here on Sports Spectrum.